before I introduce our panelists, just want to make sure that you know who the staff are that are on this call today. My name is Lorraine Novak. I'm the director of the Connect Through Tech programs here at DOROT. We also have Lily Sokoban, who is our program assistant, and Ruthie Gottesman, who is our program administrator. Our panel today includes Mark Phillips, who is a lifelong technology enthusiast. He's also made it his career working for companies such as IBM and Amazon. Mark is a longtime volunteer at DOROT. Some of you may already know him. He's been volunteering with us as a technology coach, among other things, and also serves as a lay member on the technology committee of DOROT's board. So we welcome Mark. We also would like to welcome back Erica Freeman, who also works in the technology field. She's a consultant at Deloitte, and she's helping their clients to enhance their technology capability. Mary O'Shaughnessy, our DOROT IT director, is still involved with jury duty. Some of you who came to our first session remember Mary had hoped to be here for that. It's been a long stay for her there, and unfortunately she sends her regrets that she's not able to join us. I'm going to turn this over to Ruthie, who's going to get us started on our first topic. So Ruthie, take us away.
All right, so we're going to get started with encryption. So thinking about how we know that we can trust a website. So to start, I'm going to launch a polling question that will appear on your screen. And the question is, how are you confident in your ability to tell which websites are safe to use? And you can choose your confidence level. I'll give everyone a moment to select the answer. Okay, great. So we can see that 30% are not at all confident, while larger 60% are somewhat confident, and 10% feel extremely confident. So it sounds like a lot of people are interested in hearing more about this. So here is a common situation. Edgar likes to use the internet to find answers to questions he is wondering about. Every time he searches something, he gets a long list of results. Edgar knows that some people use websites to commit fraud or may contain information that isn't reliable. How can Edgar choose which websites would be best to use? I'm now going to turn it over to Mark and Erica, our panelists, to discuss this.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here again. So for those of you who are returning, glad to see you again. And for those of you who are new, very excited to meet you all as well. So thank you, Ruthie, for sharing that prompt just a few moments ago about Edgar. I think this is something that many of us can relate to. So for instance, I think the key thing to know here is that not all websites require the same level of safety concern. So for instance, if you're reading an article on a website, if you're looking at pictures that were shared with you, perhaps looking at a local restaurant's menu online, there's really no need to be overly concerned because there you're not exchanging any sort of data or personal information. It's very transactional. You're going there to read a menu, to read a story, to watch a video, but you're not necessarily you're not doing any sort of transactions there. That being said, I know, especially since the beginning of COVID, I'm sure a bunch of us have started buying things more and more online. I know I have, especially with grocery delivery and how easy it is to get things bought online. I've found myself ordering things usually once or twice a week. And maybe many of you can relate to that as well. So when you're starting to buy things online or do banking online or anything else that you typically might not have done prior online, there are some considerations to think about there. And if you remember our last session that we had from the first part of Living Well Digitally, we talked about scamming and frauds and in trying to look for warning signs. So I'll reiterate a few of those, and then I'll show you examples of what to look for on your address bar where you type in www. The name of the website. So I'll show that in just a few moments. But first, a few things to keep in mind. So the number one thing that you should be looking for is if you're determining if a site is legitimate or not before you're about to buy something on there is, does it pass the sniff test? So does it look normal? Are there typos? Do images seem distorted or bizarre? These are the types of things that can make you question whether the validity of the website is real or not. If we're talking about companies like, let's say, Bank of America or Amazon.com, you're going to expect those websites to be good, look nice, and not feel a bit off. So I would say go with your gut first. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. The second thing to look for is what I'm going to be sharing my screen to give an example of, which is looking at the address bar, which I'll show you in just a moment. Oh, Ruthie, can you give me access to share my screen?
Sure. Right now.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen right now. Thank you. And some of these might look familiar. So whether you are, browsing the internet on either Safari, some of you might have Chrome, some of you might have Firefox. These are all different web browsers that perhaps you're familiar with. I know the default on any sort of Apple iPhone or iPad tends to be Safari. So there are a few things to look for when you're trying to determine whether a website is secure. First and foremost, look for a padlock, this little padlock icon. I wanted to show a few examples of what it looks like across Safari, Chrome, and Firefox, because although it's still generally the same, the design is a little bit different. And I know that if you perhaps aren't used to it, it might be a bit confusing. But just know anytime you see a padlock, that generally means the site is fine. The next thing to know is also looking for the correct spelling of the name of the website. So for instance, as you can see here, I pulled in Amazon.com. This is spelled correctly. This looks fine. I would say passes the sniff test. However, if you're getting a link sent to you or you somehow find something in Google that doesn't seem right, it might have Amazon misspelled. It might be Amazon dot something else, so not com. It might be net. It might be something else. These are the types of things that you should be looking for. But what I will say before I pass this over to Erica is just because there's a padlock doesn't mean that the website is immediately safe. More and more scammers are getting sophisticated and including this padlock here, even on sites that should not be legitimate, which is why I recommend looking for the correct spelling and the padlock, those two things together, sort of like peanut butter and jelly. They go well together. It's important to look for, and it's something that keeps everything top of mind for you. So with that being said, I'll pass it over to Erica now, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Mark. So a few other things to know about encryption. There are certain domains that you can almost initially trust. So something like .com is something that any site can have. If you're a business, you have a website, you can do .com, but almost anything that's .org or .gov should be factual and should be encrypted. These are sites that are run by the government or run by noted organizations that you should be able to inherently trust. It should still have those locks on it. It should still be encrypted, but more or less you don't have to worry as much about them because they are safer. And then in general, like what Mark said, it should be pretty straightforward. It should be helpful for you. It should be one of those things where if the site is not working or it doesn't look right, use your gut instincts, use your judgment when going on these different types of websites. And I think that was all we wanted to talk about for this.
I just want to ask one of our panelists if either of you could just define the word encryption. I know that we've used it a couple of times and we're sort of describing what you'll see, but I don't know that we've actually defined it for our audience. Thank you.
Yeah, so encryption is, let's see, the easiest way to describe it is it's keeping what you're saying and doing safe. So something that, and you'll probably hear when it comes to encryption, the opposite is plain text. So when it's plain text, like if you're all in the chat right now, you can see what everyone's saying, you can see the words they have here, and it's just right in front of your face. When something's encrypted, that means that the exchange of these messages is almost coded, so that way someone outside of that can't inherently look at it in the same way that you could see this chat. Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that definition.
Sure, I would say that's a good start, of course. And then I think bringing this back to some other examples beyond Zoom too, anytime you're doing any sort of financial transaction online, that is going to be private, which is also known as encrypted. That is something that is really important to keep in mind. Seeing that padlock, making sure the website's spelled correctly, and knowing that if for some reason someone were to be, in your machine, for lack of a better term, they couldn't see it because it's encrypted. When you're also thinking about other examples of encryption, it's also banking as well. So it's not just buying things online. If you are on Bank of America's website or another bank's website, there's a very good chance that it's going to ask you for encryption or make sure that encryption is turned on in your browser. This ultimately just means things will be more private and more secure for you as possible. Encryption is not 100% foolproof. Nothing is in cybersecurity, but it gives you the highest level of protection compared to having something like Erica said, which is plain text and anyone can read regardless of where they are.
So if both of our panelists have finished presenting on this topic a little bit earlier than we expected, Lily, you could pull any other questions from the chat to share with the rest of our audience.
Sure. Yeah. So we have a question about using PayPal as an example. Maybe if you could just talk about the safety and risks of paying for things online.
Sure, I can start. So I've used PayPal a lot. In fact, I use a lot of online payment apps, but I make sure that there's two things to always keep in mind before I use these payment apps. First of which is if I'm buying something online, perhaps on a website like eBay or another thing where I'm transacting with someone who is not a business, but I'm buying something from someone like a seller, I make sure that I'm using the business transaction setting within eBay. So typically, within PayPal. In PayPal, there's a few different settings. You could pay for things through friends. So if you're reimbursing a friend, someone that you know, or you can use the business version of it, which is also free to use, but there's a lot of protection from eBay's fraud protection, PayPal's fraud protection. So in other words, if I'm buying something from a seller and I use the business version of eBay, I'm protected. If someone defrauds me, my purchase price is covered under the insurance that PayPal has. Another thing that I also consider whenever I'm using a payment app as well is making sure that I'm sending the money to the right person. It's a lot easier than you might think to send money to someone by accident, especially if you miss a letter in their name or a number in their phone number, and there's no way to get that back. So you have to be very, very careful to ensure that if you're sending money or receiving money, that you're doing it securely, it's going to the right person, and that if you're transacting with someone who you don't know, that you're using that business protection setting within PayPal.
Great, thank you. And sort of off of that, we have a bunch of questions about how to turn on encryption on your device or your browser, and how to know that you've set that up. Maybe Erica can answer.
Sure. So most of the websites, if they're encrypted, that's something on their website that they've set up. There's a few things to make sure that it's encrypted. One is it depends on the service you use. It's making sure that you see all of the things that Mark just talked us through. If you want to be secure and you're unsure about the website itself, check for all the things Mark just went through, like the lock. You can also use a private network. I think we've talked about that, or we can talk about that, where you have that and just anything you use is encrypted. But most of the time it's dependent on the website.
Okay, so to be clear, you don't have to turn on encryption on your own device. It's just what you're looking for when you're searching on the internet.
Correct. You can use an encrypted network, but that's a whole other layer that we could talk about another time.
Encryption is typically turned on by default also for a lot of pieces of technology. So it's not necessarily something you need to think about.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to take us on to the next topic that we wanted to talk about, which is the idea of searching incognito, which sounds really interesting to me. So I'm going to launch our poll. Hold on just a second. Oh, I see the dog. Okay, so, there we go. All right, can everyone see that? You can start answering. Do you ever wish you could search online without companies or even someone else in your own household being able to see what you looked at? So we'll leave that up for a few moments to give people a chance to answer. Okay, it looks like we have a full response. So we have about 93% of people saying yes, they wish that they could do that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. This idea of searching incognito. I'm going to turn this over to Erica, who's going to talk a little bit now about how that all works and what that means.
Thanks, Lorraine. All right,
Thanks,
give me
Erica.
1 second to share my screen. All right, 1 second. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen now. That's sharing the incognito private mode slides. One thing is we're talking here about incognito mode. I know that's what we call it in Google Chrome. I think some other browsers like Internet Explorer will.
Erica, you just got muted. Thanks.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hopefully it should be okay. So I don't know when I got muted, but incognito mode is what it's called in Google Chrome. It may also be called private mode in Internet Explorer, some of your other browsers. What this means is browsing privately. So it will not save your history, your cookies, site data, and any information that you entered. So if you enter your username and password while you're in this certain type of mode, it will not save that. If you go to search for something in Google, it will not save that. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. But just to note, the difference is if you download something or you bookmark something, it will keep that. And if you're using a public computer, and when we say public, we mean a school computer, a work computer, maybe a public library computer, your activity will not be hidden from those institutions. So you may not, so it still will not save your username and password, your search history, but for the safety of those institutions, they could still see what you're doing. So if you do anything, hopefully not, but if there's anything illegal or inappropriate, they will still be able to track that and identify that for the safety of those people using their computers. But what this means is if you use this mode, if you have a shared device, if you have like a family computer, or if you share your laptop or your phone or your iPad or something like that with someone else in your home, they won't be able to see what you just did in that session. So the best analogy I have for this is it's almost like short-term memory loss. If you're talking to someone and having a conversation with them, and then you leave that conversation, you might not remember anything that they just said. But if they gave you a notebook and they handed you a piece of paper, in this case, that would equate to a download or a bookmark. You would still have that even if you forget everything you left the conversation with. And also, if there's another party that was eavesdropping, in this case, that's equating to your school or work, they would still remember. So it's like you're the one with the short-term memory loss, your laptop or computer is the one that can't remember, but anything that's written down like a download or bookmark is kept, and anything, if it's not a personal computer, it could still be identified. Hopefully that makes sense to you all. And then why would you use it? Like I said, if you're in the good thing is if you use this mode when you're in a public library or at a friend's house, or it's not your computer, it's something that you don't need to think about. You know, your password or your username or your search history just won't be stored there. If you have a shared computer in the home, you know what you just did in that session won't be stored there. It could be very helpful if you're planning a surprise party. If that person uses the same computer, they won't see what you were just searching for. If you're searching for something private, like a medical question, a condition, or prescriptions, and you want to keep that private, you don't have to remember to clear your browser history or anything that you just did. And also, if you're in the home of someone, unfortunately, where you might not trust, you can use this mode to make sure that you can search for help or access your device or look for resources for help. And then once you close out of the session, they wouldn't have seen that you just searched for help. So with that, I'm in Google Chrome. The way you do this and the way you make sure you're going into incognito or private mode is you can either open a incognito window. So keep in mind, there's two different windows. So for example, in this window, you can have many tabs. Any of these tabs are in the same mode. But if you open a private or incognito window, it's going to be completely separate. And I believe both in Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, it's going to be gray. Or it's going to be a darker version of the normal version that you're using. And that way, you know, you can still keep your normal mode up, but then you can have this private mode that you're working in.
Erica, can you show that just one more time so people can see what you're clicking on?
Yep. So you go to File and then New Incognito Window. It may also say New Private Window. If you're on a device, it might be at the bottom of your screen and it'll show like the number of tabs you have. If you click that, there might be a private version or an incognito version. So look for a little plus sign or look for something that can expand the tabs that you have. But I'm on a Mac right now, and this is going to say New Incognito Window, or like I said, it might say New Private Window. And then you'll know when you're in the right place, because usually no matter what internet you're using, it will be a darker version. It'll be gray.
Erica, there are a number of people in the chat that are asking to see what it looks like in other browsers like Safari. Are you able to go into another browser besides Chrome?
Let's see what I have here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. What I have on the back. Okay, I have Safari. Give that a second. So this is a normal browser in Safari. We're going to go to File, New Private Window. And now it says, so this one isn't dark like Chrome is, but on the top it says Private Browsing Enabled. So it's very clear that you're in private mode here. And then actually the search bar is darker. So just make sure you're in here, and then, you know, you can have multiple tabs in the browser, and all of these tabs, as long as it's in the same window, would be part of your private search.
So regardless of what browser you're in, because we're getting questions about lots of different browsers, it's always to go to the top of the toolbar, go to File, and it will either say something about private window or incognito.
Yep.
That's regardless of whatever browser you're using, Firefox, Explorer, Safari. Okay,
Exactly.
thank you, Erica.
Yeah. And I'm just going to open my phone. I use Safari on my phone. So I can give you the right thing here. I don't know how to best do this, but on my phone, when I click on the bottom right where you can see all of your different websites that you have up. I don't know if this is hard for people to see, but we can send some screenshots out next week. It says for me, 116 tabs. I have way too many tabs open. You would click that and let's see, I know it's going to be small. So like I said, I'll take a screenshot. It shows 116 tabs or it shows private. And then I would click private and now you're in a whole different mode of viewing your internet on your phone. That was probably really small to say, so I'll grab those screenshots for everyone and send them out. But it's a similar concept. And same with your iPad, it would be similar to your iPhone or mobile device. And then one thing to note, if you're not in this mode and you realize you would have liked to be in this mode, you can go to your settings. So file, not file. So I'm going to click on Chrome. I'm going to click on preferences. That will bring you to your settings. You will go to security and privacy and then clear browsing data. This will clear all of your history, your cookies, your passwords, anything. You can do it from the last 24 hours, the last hour, the last week, 4 weeks, all time. Keep in mind, the more time you do it, the slower this will take to clear it all. But if you forgot to be in private mode, this will clear pretty much everything that you wouldn't have been able to see in private or incognito mode. And if we do it in Safari, it's also preferences. And then it's either security or privacy. This is how you can block cookies. Let's see, where is clearing? Clear history is a separate thing. And this is where you have your options here and you can clear your history. In case, I don't know if there's a question here because I can't see my chat while I'm sharing my screen, but if any of you don't know, cookies are just little pieces of information about you to customize your internet experience. It doesn't really do anything other than if you are looking at something that's really private, like say you're doing a surprise party and you're searching for giant balloons, the website is going to just identify that you're searching for that. And then you might get a targeted ad for balloons, or you might get a suggestion for balloons later on in a completely different session. So it might be good to clear it if you are not in a private mode.
This is a great time for Lily to pose some of the questions from the chat. Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, so thank you. On the topic of cookies, I think that would be helpful to just go over it a little bit more. When you are using incognito mode, can websites access your cookies, or is that the whole point of incognito mode, that they cannot?
They cannot access your cookies.
Okay, great. I think that was important. And then there are some questions about different types of browsers that seem to be maybe advertised as more private, like Brave, if you've heard of, or are there browsers that are more private, say, than Chrome or Safari when you use incognito mode, or does using incognito mode protect you the same as any other private browser?
I haven't heard of Brave, but in private or incognito mode is gonna act the same in any type of browser. It's gonna be private. It's not gonna track what you're searching. Again, unless it's a private computer, your work or your school or whoever can still potentially see what you're doing in case of anything inappropriate or malicious. But if it's your private computer, they all pretty much function the same.
Okay, so using incognito mode on any browser will do the trick.
Right.
Or private mode or whatever it's called. Okay, great. And then about clearing cookies, is there something you could go over on how to do that?
Yep, let me share my screen again. Again, depends on the browser. It looked like for Safari, it's clear history, and this will remove related cookies and other website data, and you can pick the amount of time. And then for Chrome, it was in settings right here, where you can choose and you can click the browsing history cookies, and again, the amount of time, and then clear data. And it's all pretty similar if you're not using Safari or Chrome. It's either in your settings or it's in file or something around here.
Great. And then I think something that sort of came up is why not just use incognito mode all the time? Is there a benefit to not going on incognito mode for certain things?
Up to you. If you're someone that, I know I do it sometimes, if you search for the same thing a lot, your search will be saved. If you like that your username is already populated when you're going into a site that you have to type in your username and password, you would use it for that reason. Incognito mode wouldn't save any of that. But no, I mean, it's safer to use incognito mode. It doesn't store anything. But you can also use regular mode and clear it every once in a while. You can, just whatever is most comfortable for you.
Great. I think that's really helpful. Thank you.
Great. So now we'll move on to our next topic, which is general best practices. I'm going to put up a poll that we've actually already been discussing. Do you take steps to manage cookies when online? Can answer yes or no. Okay, so looks like a good amount of people have responded. And it looks like 69% of people do not take steps right now to manage cookies when online. So let's discuss. I'm gonna start with a scenario. Isabella gets her car inspected every year. The mechanic tells her what things need to be taken care of to keep the car running well and to keep her safe as the driver. Isabella wonders if there are basic things she can be doing to keep her tablet running efficiently and keep all of her data secure. I'm going to turn this over to Erica and Mark to discuss.
Sure. So I can handle it too, since I know Erica has been so helpful in the prior section too. Let's talk first about updating software. I think we've all been there. Why do the software updates come up in the most inconvenient times? You're trying to talk to your doctor online on their portal, and you get a notification that says, update your PC now. Or perhaps you're trying to show pictures from a fun trip on your phone to a friend or family member, and you get that little notification that says, download the newest version of Facebook or another app. While those notifications can tend to be a bit annoying, they actually are very important, and a lot of people underestimate how important they can be. Because the reason why you would want to update an app is for a few reasons. And I'll give you examples in a little bit. I'll show you how you can figure out how to download updates for your devices if you're not quite sure. But in the meantime, here are a few reasons why you might want to. First of which is security. Security is the key for everything you do online. You wouldn't drive a car without a seatbelt, so there's no reason that you would want to be using software or using apps on your phone that perhaps aren't the latest and greatest in keeping you safe. What happens is over time, really bad people like scammers, hackers, or just general bad parties will find vulnerabilities in the different apps that companies put out and use it to steal data. So I think an example might be, for instance, if you're using like a credit reporting app, sometimes there are credit reporting breaches. You might remember the one from Equifax several years ago. And if you had an app, there might have been an opportunity for them to get in there and get information. However, you can safeguard that by making sure you always have the latest version of an app. So the next time you get a notification that says download an update, download an app, whatever the case may be, do it as soon as you can. Doesn't need to be that exact instance, except if you're, unless, it's something you can come back to. But ultimately, by updating things, you're keeping yourself safe, because by virtue of doing that, the companies have found the breach, they've fixed it, they pushed out a new update, and they want to keep you safe as well. Now, one thing that I want to walk through as well, which I'll show you, and these will be available after the, can you give me access to present again, Ruthie?
Yes.
One thing to keep in mind too, is that following this presentation, you'll be able to access these links in this presentation, and it's good for just general knowledge and refreshing. So I will share my screen. And there are two distinct ways to update your apps, whether you're using an Apple device like an iPhone or an iPad, and then other ways to update an Android device or tablet. Within the Apple iPhone, if you're able to find the App Store icon on your phone or iPad, which is typically a blue square with a giant white A, and it says App Store underneath it, that's where you would go in to download new apps or update them. And this link will show you how to do that. It's a video tutorial. And then if you have an Android device, you would have to go into something called the Google Play Store. So that is the Android version of where you download and update apps as well. And by going there, you'll be able to easily navigate it. And there should be giant buttons that say update now or update here, because it's in both Apple and Android's best interest for your safety to make sure that you're downloading and using the latest versions of each app. So these video tutorials are going to be available after this call. And also keep in mind, Google's your best friend. So if you want to search how to update apps on your iPhone, you simply have to type it in, and you'll find all sorts of great resources, videos, links from Apple or Android themselves on how to do those actions. They invest a lot of effort into making those frequently asked questions actionable for you. Another thing that I wanted to talk about on the topic of best practices is also logging out. So some of you might be familiar with this, especially if you're using a public device like a computer in a library or in a shared space. I equate this to locking the door before you leave your apartment. So you wouldn't leave the door wide open. You certainly wouldn't leave it unlocked. But logging out ultimately keeps things private. So for instance, you're all logged in on your phones or computers right now because you're actively using them. But should you step away and there are people in your vicinity who you maybe don't trust or you're trying to keep private, you would want to log out. By virtue of logging out, no one can log in unless they have your codes or passwords. So for instance, if you're trying to get access to your phone, you might have to put in a 4 or 6 digit code to enter it in to use it. And with your computer, you might be typing in a password every time you want to use it. That's by virtue of you logging out, that keeps it safe because only you can get back into that device. And it's really important to keep that in mind, especially if, as we mentioned earlier, you're in a situation where maybe you don't feel safe or you're with people in your home that you don't necessarily trust or don't trust yet. This is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just more of a security precaution. Another thing that I think is also worth mentioning too, on the same topic of security, is secure Wi-Fi. And I'll give a scenario here, which I'm sure many of you might encounter because I know I've encountered it myself. Let's say you're at the doctor's office, and because so many doctors in New York either have basement offices or basement exam rooms, or in these very old pre-war buildings that have very thick walls, sometimes you can't get cell service, and they'll give you the ability to log on to their network just within that office. And what I would recommend there is you can access it for any sort of basic activities. Perhaps you're passing the time by reading a story or chatting on Facebook or texting someone. That's fine. I wouldn't suggest, however, doing anything where you exchange personal or private data on these types of networks, because you can't be certain or sure that they're not being breached and there's not the same level of security as there is perhaps in your own home. So I would highly, highly recommend, if you're going to connect to a public Wi-Fi network, whether it's at the doctor's office, whether it's on the subway, because the subway does offer free Wi-Fi, I wouldn't do anything on there that you wouldn't want potentially being, in the slim chance it does happen, being breached. So save the banking, save any sort of private information for when you're at home on a private network rather than a public network that either the subway or perhaps your doctor's office is offering.
Mark, just a caveat there. That's inclusive of private mode. Just do not use any financial information while you're on a public Wi-Fi, while you're on a Wi-Fi network that is not yours, that you cannot trust, even if you're in private mode. Again, because it's not your network, it's not safe.
Exactly. That's a really good point, Erica. So another thing on the one last topic that I'll say, or sorry, one last thing that I'll add here about secure Wi-Fi is that is something that it's a convenience thing. So when you're offered free Wi-Fi, it's a convenience thing. And you have to keep that in mind, that there's always some sort of trade-off. If you're being offered something for free, there's probably a reason why. So there's not enough time, unfortunately, to get into that because it's all about data privacy and security. But what I will say is that if you're being offered something for free, there's a very good chance that you potentially are the product. So whatever data you're looking at or searching for is being sent back to an organization to understand your viewing habits. So just keep that in mind. That's the last thing I'll add there. And that's not meant to be alarmist. That's not meant to be scary. It's just meant to for your own awareness that there's always a trade-off there. Another topic that I'd like to cover, which I'm thinking might take us through to the end, is backing up data. And I think that for many of us, if you've been using computers for the last 20 or so years, you might remember different ways that you've saved things, perhaps on a CD-ROM, perhaps on a thumb drive, or perhaps even going back to, say, the 80s or 90s, floppy disks. So that's how we've all backed up information over the past several decades and past several years. And there's new ways to back up information too. There's two that I want to walk through because I think these are the most applicable to this audience, because I know many of you are retirees, and I want to make sure that I'm talking through the things that I know you're most likely to use. The first and the most obvious thing that you could be using to back things up, which you might already have, are backup hard drives. They're usually about this big, might be a square, might be rectangular, and they usually have a few cords hanging off of them, and they plug into the USB drive on your computer. And this is where people have typically saved stories, manuscripts, pictures, videos. I know that when I did tech coaching in home before the pandemic, I worked with a client who had an entire room full of these hard drives because she was a world traveler and always wanted to save her photos. So the best way that I would recommend this is that if you are someone who considers yourself fairly low tech or not someone that is ready to take a step into looking at saving things to the cloud, this is the most clear physical thing that you could be backing up to. You can typically get these at Staples or any sort of office supply store. They've really come down in price over the last several years. They used to be hundreds of dollars. Now you could probably get them for under 50. It really just depends on the storage size, the capacity of that actual device. And this is something where you essentially plug it into your computer, you drag the files to it, or perhaps you ask someone on the DOROT Connect Through Tech program to help you with that in your home or virtually, and you can save things to these hard drives. The downside, of course, is that this is physical media. You can hold it in your hand. So if it's destroyed, stolen, or lost, it's gone. It is gone. And, of course, there's downsides to everything, but if you are in a precarious living situation, or perhaps you have the tendency to misplace things, this might not be the best thing to do in those circumstances. The second way that you could save things, so we just talked about something, a physical way to save your images, because it's in a hard drive that you plug into your computer. The other way to save things is to the cloud. And many of you are probably saying, I hear the cloud, I know what it is, I don't get it. Just think of it as a digital way to store things. So instead of saving those pictures and things to a physical hard drive, you're storing it online. And it's safe there because there's a lot of protection and resilience built into where you're saving things. For instance, if you're using an Apple device, you might be familiar with iCloud. iCloud is an example of a cloud where you can store things online. And because Apple manages that, you know that there isn't going to be any sort of security data loss, major loss, because you know that it's saved there. Now, it's not completely free from security breaches. That happens to the best of these companies. But in terms of the integrity and the protection of that information, let's say you have images or stories or things that you really want to save and not lose, a very good way to save that is online. And the thing here too to keep in mind is that this is available to people even if you don't have an iCloud account or have an Apple device. For instance, you can save things on Google Drive if you have an Android device. You can save things to Dropbox, which you might be familiar with. If you've ever been sent a large file or images, perhaps from a grandchild or a family member, they might have sent you a Dropbox link. These are the types of things that you can save or rather access online. The one downside that I will say is that this is a subscription service for a lot of these companies. So whereas you're able to buy a hard drive and it's a one-time fixed cost, if you save things to the cloud and you exceed the amount of space they give you, you will have to pay more incrementally. And it's usually on a monthly or a annual basis. I wouldn't consider it cost prohibitive. It's not hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but I also know that there are people from different economic backgrounds on here, and I want to be conscious of that not everyone can afford cloud storage. My best suggestion to you is to investigate this if you're curious. Simply going into Google or going into another search engine and typing in how much does cloud storage cost on Google Drive or on Dropbox, and you can see the amount of space you would be given and for the prices there. The added value of this as well is that because things are stored to the cloud and perhaps you want to share with either caretakers or family members or friends, you don't have to have them come into your home and plug in your hard drive to show them things. You can just send them the website link and they can view it. So it's a lot more valuable, especially if you're communicating with people over long distances, or perhaps you don't feel comfortable having people in your home at this moment due to COVID. It's a more convenient way to share information. So I know that I'm at time and I'm going to pause there for any sort of questions that have come through.
Mark, I just want to add one thing to connect your first topic to this topic is if you cannot upgrade your computer because of your storage, this is your solution. Back up your data, back up any additional storage, old pictures, old files onto either solution that Mark mentioned to give storage available for an upgrade.
Great, yeah. That's helpful. And so kind of along those lines, there's some questions about retrieving things. If you've saved them to a hard drive or to the cloud, how do you then retrieve something like a photo if you wanted to see it after the fact?
Sure. So if you have a hard drive, so you've saved it to a physical device that you can hold in your hands and physically plug into your computer, all you need to do is literally plug it into your computer. And most computers within the last 10 years or so, which I imagine most people have a computer from the last 10 years, you will automatically get a window on your screen that will say view files or something to that effect. Depends on what device and computer you're using, but it'll likely say view images or view files on this hard drive. If you're using a cloud, which means that you can't hold it in your hands, it's something that exists online, you will be able to access it through your web browser. So for instance, if you're saving things to your iCloud, you might want to go to iCloud.com, either on your phone or your computer. If you've saved things to your Google Drive, because perhaps you use a Google Drive or you have an Android device, you would go to drive.google.com and be able to log in and find your information there. And it's all searchable.
Awesome, thank you. And another question about the safety involved with backing up your information. A question about tax information or financial data and saving that to the cloud or to a hard drive, and maybe what you suggest.
Sure, and this is a very timely topic because I just got my tax returns back too. So there are two things. For me, I consider myself a tech savvy person, which is why I'm giving this chat. So I feel comfortable saving my stuff in private folders on my Google Drive. I personally save everything to the cloud because I've been through too many computer crashes that I care to mention, and I prefer to save things to the cloud for safety. Because if my computer breaks, I know things are saved in the cloud. I keep my tax information there, and I keep it in a few folders there, and I keep it private. Another thing is that within the last 2 years, my CPA actually has their own online file storage system for my taxes. In fact, that's how they communicate now. They'll send me a link and say, Mark, your information is available on our system. Click here to view it. You can only access it with the last 4 digits of your social security number. So I know that if someone were to get into my email address by accident, they wouldn't be able to get into my tax information because they probably would not know the last 4 digits of my SSN. So to answer your question, it depends on what your level of comfort is with cloud technology. If you feel comfortable with saving it online and knowing that you'll keep it private, great, that's fine. However, if this is something where you're not quite there yet, I still say keep the hard copy in a locked file cabinet. I know that's something that my parents still do.
It all comes down to, I would just be wary, even in like tech coaching, it comes down to your personal, what we call risk appetite, how comfortable you are with certain things. Like Mark, I also use the cloud to store my financial information. If you want to store it there, or you want to store it, or you want to print it, another thing you can do is redact your social security number before uploading it to the cloud. So that way it's there, but at least maybe some private data that you're very concerned about isn't there. One thing to remember is even in the cloud, Amazon, Google, these companies aren't completely removed of potential cyber attacks. That doesn't mean your data is going to get taken or hacked or anything like that, but you're putting your information in the hands of another company. There is a chance, the same way there's a chance that you would lose, a piece of paper. So just whatever is most comfortable to you, but we're here to help with what makes sense.
And I'm sorry that we're going to have to wrap up right on that last point. It is now 2 o'clock. I just want to remind everybody, you will be getting an email tomorrow from Ruthie, our program administrator, with a survey about this session. And about a week from today, you will receive a second email. It will include a link to this video. It will have the Q&A document with all the questions that have put into the chat and all the different answers from our panelists. And we will also include a link to our first session for those who are curious about that. We would love to hear from you on that survey and know what other topics would be of interest to you. We plan on doing this series on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. So we're really looking forward to having your feedback so we can bring you the information that you really want to have. Thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.